I'm Larry Menti. Welcome to Jersey Matters. After the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner on Staten Island at the hands of police, and the decision by two grand juries not to press charges, race has once again become a top issue in this country. And the Asbury Park Press is doing a series on race called Conversations on Race, and the lead reporter is Jay Scott Smith. Jay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Much of the conversation nationally has been about the relationship between police officers, mostly white police officers, and the African American community. Is that what you're focusing on?
It's one of the aspects of it. The column I wrote that started the entire thing focused on primarily what it was like growing up as a black male in this country. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and my father is a now retired Detroit police officer. And the experience of it is, I always based it on a simple phrase that my mother uses every time, no matter whether I was 5 years old or 10 years old or 16 or today. Every time I talked to her, she would always tell me, please be careful. And it was always kind of a heavy statement. And the older I got, the heavier you start to figure out what it is. So
please be careful with police?
Please be careful in general, because you never really know who could be out here to hurt you. And as I wrote in the piece, she meant that just as much, saying that I need to worry about being assaulted or killed by some thug on the street as I would be being assaulted or possibly killed by a police officer during a traffic stop. It could be either one. And that's part of the conversation that we were having, is that it's just kind of getting it out there, getting that it's not just based on police. I mean, police are, and right now that is the biggest issue because of what happened in Ferguson and what's happened in New York. But the police brutality issue's gone on for most of my life. I'm old enough to remember Rodney King and how I felt that night or that day when the cops were acquitted in 1992. And I was just confused then, because I'm only 12, 13 years old. I didn't know what was going on to the full extent. But police brutality has been an issue in the black community, or with the black community, for decades. It's just that now in 2014, we've reached that, now 2015, we've reached that breaking point where what is going on here?
And right, well, there's been a feeling, though, that things have gotten better. And so here we are having the conversation again after all this time. When you were talking about Rodney King, we thought we've improved much since then, certainly since the 60s. Have we?
We have in certain aspects. I think, unfortunately, one of the things that has improved is technology, where there are countless stories of issues between blacks and the police or Latinos and the police that have gone on for years. It's just that you don't have social media in 1985 or 1995 that you have in 2015. So it changed the dynamic, and it's a part of a larger issue that race is a largely misunderstood thing. It's a conversation that makes people very uncomfortable. It's one of those things where if you bring it up in certain circles, it will just shut everything down. And what we're trying to do with the Asbury Park Press with this series, it's not just myself. It was another one of our writers talked about her interracial marriage. We had one of our lead editors, Randy Bergman, gave his story of being a white man dealing with race. We have another one of our editors wrote about working for an African American male boss. It comes from different sides of things.
So the conversations you're having, for the most part, are very personal stories.
Yes, these
are personal relationships.
Yeah, and it's coming from different angles all the time. And the thing is, we welcome people of all races to have this conversation. We want to get it out there. We don't want it to just simply be an uncomfortable or borderline hostile conversation. But things are going to get very real. You got to be honest with people. And the way that maybe a former police officer, a New Jersey state trooper, will see something doesn't jibe with the way that a regular black man on the street would see things. I mean, after I wrote that column, I got a letter from a gentleman who lives here in New Jersey but grew up in South Carolina. And he was telling me of a story when he was 15 years old in 1965, being assaulted by white police officers while being a part of an NAACP march. And it cut deep, because he described it as that they put him in the cell and just said, we're going to put you in your place. We're going to treat you. We're going to show you what happens when you go against us. And when you describe what it was like in the 1960s, this is 50 years ago, and how much things have changed, but yet at the same time there are some similarities. Maybe not to that extreme. I'll never just impugn all police officers. My dad was a cop for 30 years. I know there are good men and women who go out every single day and risk their lives.
Most of them are good, 90%.
A vast majority of
Right.
them go out and risk their lives for what can be a very thankless job at times. But we cannot also sit here and act as if there aren't police officers who do single out black drivers or single out Latinos.
Does that happen to you?
Oh, it's happened to me. I described it in one of the columns that I got followed around Michigan State University by a police officer. And it was for no other reason than just he was trying to find something. And when he didn't find it, he follows me all the way into a parking lot, shines a flashlight on me, demands to know why I'm there. And once he figured out I was just a student there, he takes off. But it freaks you out because you're thinking, I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And again, I don't want to.
And do you think that whites can't understand that?
I think some of them don't. It's not all. It's some. We're in a different generation because now we're seeing more and more people beginning to understand that. But there is going to be this, almost like this bubble. I won't say it comes from a place of hostility or racism. Sometimes it's just, if you're not used to experiencing that, you're looking at a black person or a Latino or maybe an Arab person saying they've been singled out by police as if this is foreign.
I think a lot of people saw the election of President Obama and thought, look, we elected a black president. We're not racist anymore. And they saw that as a kind of a panacea, that we're past that now. We've moved on.
I would like to.
Was that naive?
It's naive at best, thinking that it changed things. I will say that the election of President Obama, if nothing else, has kind of brought a lot of this to the surface, which was needed. Because there was this idea that once we got out of the 60s and 70s and into the 80s and into the 90s, things had changed. And we weren't this utterly terrible racist society or the separatist society. And while things are a lot better than they were in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it's exposed that there are still underlying racial tensions, and there are, while maybe not blatantly racist language, it's now more coded language, and a lot of hostility directed toward the president that does seem to have some basis in his ethnicity and his race.
Well, let's take it the other side, though, because there's a lot of people, especially conservatives, who say President Obama has divided us even more by constantly imposing himself on these situations where race is involved before he knows all the facts. Is that fair?
I would say that there can be some truth to that, but largely that also sounds like an excuse. It would be almost as if to say, well, what is he supposed to do? He's in a catch-22 situation. If he doesn't speak up, black community, the minority community in general is going to look at him and say, well, why aren't you saying something on this? But when he does speak up, he's being called divisive by people on the other side of the aisle. He's divisive, and that this is just an attempt to play the race card. At certain times, it's just time to be honest. I mean, before he was president of the United States, he was still just another black man who lived in Chicago and went to law school and experienced a lot of the same things and the same struggles that every young black man or young Latino has dealt with at some point in their lives, even if it's not outwardly intentional. It's not like something from the 1950s where you've got the KKK on your lawn, but it's still there.
There's so many other things we could talk about, but we've run out of time. I appreciate you coming in, Jay. As you said, it's a continuing conversation. And you can read much more about it in the Asbury Park Press. We'll be right back.